and welcome to our webinar, Feeding Forage Right, Supporting Equine Health and Wellbeing. My name is Candice from Equilibrium Products, and I'm delighted to have you join us today. The information within this webinar is provided directly from a registered equine nutritionist who is actively involved in the industry and very passionate about using nutrition to help achieve success, but also providing information so that horse owners can make informed decisions when feeding their horses. In this session, we'll explore the critical role of forage in equine nutrition. We'll cover how to optimize forage for digestive health, manage common challenges, and create feeding strategies tailored to your horse's needs. Let's get started by understanding why forage is so essential. Forage is a natural and important food source. How forage is fed and what type of forage is given is a key part in managing digestive health. So, what are the benefits of forage? Forage helps meet your horse's daily nutrient requirements. Forage can also help reduce the risk of disorders such as gastric ulcers, colic, and hindgut acidosis. It encourages gut flora diversity, promoting a healthy digestive system. Foraging is also a natural behavior that horses display, which is essential for their well-being and also can help reduce stress, especially when stabled. Forage is more than just fibre. It does contain fibre, which is a key carbohydrate, but it's also a really good source of vitamins. However, vitamin content does vary depending on the type of forage. Forage is a good source of protein and macrominerals, particularly potassium, and forage will naturally contain sugar, which can sometimes be problematic when managing horses with EMS or laminitis. The horse is designed to have a forage-based digestive system. At an absolute minimum, recommended intake will vary from 1 to 1.5% of body weight on a dry matter basis. This means that for the average 500 kilogram horse, it should be having a minimum of 5 to 7.5 kilograms of forage per day. It is recommended, however, that to reduce the risk of gastric ulcers, the minimum is 2% of body weight. So if we go back to the average 500 kilogram horse example, this would mean they need a minimum of 10 kilograms of forage. It is important to keep in mind that how and when the forage is fed is also important. We want to aim for a regular pattern of intake for normal digestive function. Restricting your horse's forage intake can increase their risk of 3 different digestive disorders: equine squamous gastric disease, colic, and hindgut acidosis. Going into detail on equine squamous gastric disease, as previously mentioned, forage intake is one of the key factors in managing the risk of ESGD. When forage is in the stomach, it helps to reduce the severity of acid movement from the lower half to the upper half. This is important because the upper half is unprotected squamous tissue, to which the acid can cause irritation and damage known as splashback ulcers. Giving forage through hay or haylage or even chaff prior to exercise is a common preventative method used by horse owners. However, ideally, forage should be restricted to 1 kilogram in the last 2 hours before exercise. Forage also plays a part in the balance and diversity of gut flora, which is linked with overall health and well-being. Diets that are low in forage and high in starch are linked to an increased level of bacteria that digest starches reaching the hindgut, which lowers the pH, which can lead to acidosis. Not all forage is created equal. Forage quality can vary greatly in terms of nutritional value, fibre content, and digestibility. Daily intake is also variable and influenced by 3 factors: individual appetite, type of forage, and quality of forage. You can see in the table here how much the dry matter percentage varies from 14% to over 90%, depending on the type of forage, as well as the amount eaten in kilograms and the percentage of the horse's body weight on a dry matter basis. Looking at feeding rate studies, pasture intake has been noted at up to 5.2% of body weight, but this can be influenced by stocking rate, strict grazing, and toileting areas, which makes it hard to predict. As a guideline though, most horses will eat 2 to 2.5% of their body weight in a day in dry matter, but this is combining both forages and feeds such as chaff. So what does a natural feeding pattern look like? You can see here how the time spent grazing changes from 60 to 70% during the day down to 40 to 50 at night. We also find that horses have 10 to 15 distinct feeding periods each day, and time away from feeding does not usually exceed 3 to 4 hours. One of the biggest challenges when feeding fibre is ensuring that horses are not without access for more than 3 hours, but still being able to control the calorie intake to maintain a healthy body condition score. So, what are the common challenges with forage feeding? Do you know how much your horse eats? Do you have access to different forages depending on your horse's needs? Are you able to provide them with enough forage to keep their digestive system happy and keep them eating regularly, but reduce their calories to maintain a healthy weight? This leads us on to choosing the right forage for your horse. It's important to know the nutritional value and how digestible the forage is to make an informed decision. It's impossible to know this, however, without analysis. Broadly speaking, though, haylage is used to describe preserved forages, typically 55 to 85% dry matter. Haylage is not always higher in protein than hay. Haylage is not generally higher in sugar than hay. In fact, it is typically lower as sugar is expended during the fermentation process. Haylage is generally not recommended for horses with weight issues or metabolic issues, as the intake rate is typically higher on a voluntary basis. So let's look at forage analysis in more detail. A standard test will provide information on the following: ADF and NDF, which measures the fibrous components of the forage and are used as indicators of forage quality. In more detail, though, NDF represents the total fiber content of the plant. ADF measures the least digestible components of the plant, so a low ADF makes the forage more digestible for the horse. As the plant matures, both these levels increase and digestibility actually decreases. We'll link to labs that offer forage analysis, should you be interested in this. It is also a service commonly provided by feed companies who will also provide interpretation of the results and also provide feeding advice alongside this if required. Here's an example of a profile of hay and haylage on an average basis. You can see there's actually quite a few similarities between the two, with a few small differences. We'll leave this up here for a second or two for you to take a screenshot if you want, but we will follow up via email with the slides and the information, so you will have this to hand if you ever want to refer to it. So how do you know your horse's daily forage intake? When pasture is involved, it can make it difficult as there are so many variables. Horses can also adapt their intake rate at pasture when access is limited. You would be surprised how quickly they can eat. If your forage is highly restricted or your horse is losing weight, consider offering hay or haylage in the field to meet their daily requirements. Likewise, if your horse is stabled for part of their daily routine, you could also weigh your hay net to provide you with some information on how much your horse is actually eating and then adjust this based on their weight. For horses that are stabled for prolonged periods, knowing the intake rate as well as the quantity is important when considering risks for digestive disorders. So some key questions to ask yourself are: how many hours is my horse stabled for? How long does the forage last? Is there ample forage left over from one stable check to the next? And does my horse show signs of feeding aggression? Horses can easily spend more than 12 hours in the stable. For example, horses in a general routine of coming in at perhaps 4 p.m. and being turned out at 8 a.m. are in for a total of 16 hours, which is quite a large amount of time. Here's some considerations to take into account when restricting your horse's forage intake. If you're soaking your hay or reducing the quantity, the requirement for vitamins and minerals increases as less will be provided by the forage. Most horses will consume a large portion of their forage allocation at the start and slowly reduces intake over time. Following on from the previous point where a large portion is eaten at the start, this means that horses with restricted intake may lead to prolonged periods of time whereby the horse does not have access to forage. We know from previous discussion this increases the risk for digestive disorders such as ESGD, but could also lead to food aggression. Regular fibre intake is also important to encourage regular drinking and fluid intake, which is another factor to consider and also could influence the risk of colic. Using hay nets and other methods to pace the horse's eating is important to try and replicate a close to natural feeding pattern. We at Equilibrium did a field-based study of 10 horses and 10 ponies to investigate the effects of 3 different forage feeding methods. Horses and ponies were fed from the floor on a free choice basis. They also had a 6 centimetre hold net and a 3 centimetre hold net and were monitored for a period of 6 hours. You can see from the graph that free choice floor-fed hay and the 6 centimetre hay net had similar intakes and were not significantly different. All horses, regardless of feeding method, had a higher intake in the first hour, although the intake was significantly lower for the 3 centimetre hay net method. When using a 3 centimetre whole hay net, it also benefited total intake across the study period, with horses and ponies consuming less forage in this period, approximately 70% of the floor feeding amount. When using this forage feeding method, the horse will need to spend a longer amount of time to achieve the same intake by weight than the other two methods of forage feeding. The study was done using our Equilibrium portion pacer hay nets. We offer two mesh sizes, both 3 centimetres and 6 centimetres, and hay net sizes extra small, which holds 2 kilograms, up to extra large, which holds 12 kilograms. Prior to the feeding rate research, we also looked into different hole sizes before deciding to move forward with the 3 and the 6. We found that mesh sizes less than 3 centimetres didn't really seem to have much impact on the feeding rate compared to the 3 centimetre ones, and hole sizes larger than 6 centimetres didn't seem to have much difference either, but it could increase the risk of a horse getting stuck in the hay net if the holes were too big. The nets are made from a long-lasting, strong polypropylene woven into a knotless design which is fully recyclable at home at the end of its long life. We also offer a 3-year guarantee. If you're interested in these nets, stick around to the end of the video and we'll have a small token from us to say thank you for your time. Let's go through a few example feeding plans of different types of horses and how we might improve their feeding to improve their forage intake. The first horse is a performance horse with ESGD, so gastric ulcers. The current feed and management includes 3 kilograms of competition mix, electrolytes and linseed oil. It gets floor-fed haylage and limited pasture access, so typically 2 to 3 hours a day. The considerations with this horse and its management is that it requires a high energy mix for the level of work it's in. The haylage is the only forage source available and is given in reasonable amounts against body condition. Haylage is given twice a day on the floor. The competition mix, however, is fed 3 times a day to help lower the starch intake per meal, and the pasture is well grazed, so there's a low intake likely. So what can we do to help this performance horse to improve their forage intake but help reduce the risk of ulcers? So firstly, we'd include a minimum of 300 grams of alfalfa chaff with each meal of 1 kilogram competition mix to help regulate the pH of the stomach. Research is limited to the best amount of chaff to provide against hard feed, but as a guideline, 30% of the hard feed weight should ideally be given as chaff. Regular feeding of chaff also slows down the transit time of feed, which helps improve digestion, but also reduces the risk of starch actually reaching the hind gut. Where the haylage can only be given twice a day, a small hold hay net might be beneficial. Haylage is naturally consumed at a greater rate, and using a small hold hay net would help to regulate this intake and prolong foraging time, which also encourages a more natural feeding pattern and produces regular salivation to help buffer the stomach acid as well. So moving on to our next horse type example, the overweight horse. So their current feed and management is 1/2 kilogram feed balancer, a small handful of low-calorie chaff. They're turned out at night onto a well-grazed paddock, and they're stabled in the daytime and given a standard large soaked hay net. Things to take into consideration with this horse is that weight loss is challenging for them. Their health issues prevent an increase in exercise. They've shown signs of colic in the past when forage was significantly reduced, and they have been noted as grumpy when stabled. So here's a few recommendations to ensure adequate fibre intake for this horse without the excess calories. They could continue soaking the hay and start including a small hold hay net alongside their standard hay net to transition to just using small hold hay net. This allows time for the horse to adapt to feeding from the smaller net. They could also check the weight of the hay before soaking and just make sure that this is reduced to 2% of the horse's body weight if it's currently higher than this during the day. They could also consider using more of a straw-based low-calorie chaff into the diet and reducing the hay by the same amount by up to 1 to 2 kilograms per day. Straw-based chaffs, especially those that are non-molasses, take longer to eat and can help therefore prolong the feeding alongside the use of a small hold hay net. And finally, our last horse, the underweight horse. So current feeder management is 4 kilograms of conditioning mix, a bowl of soaked sugar beet pulp, linseed oil, muscle building supplement. The horse is stable at night and fed hay free choice, and then turned out in a group during the daytime. Things to consider with this horse is it can only be fed 2 meals a day. The horse is noted as slow to eat his bucket feed. The horse is also low ranking in the herd in the group turnout, and the only forage available is hay, and it's provided by the yard. So here's a few recommendations of improving the calorie intake while stabled for this underweight horse. So while soaked sugar beet is a good source of calories and fibre, some horses do not like the texture when it's mixed with their feed. So it can make them slow to eat, and it could result in a soggy bucket of feed as time goes on. If the horse doesn't rush his food, remove the sugar beet and feed this separately mixed with chaff. Ideally, they need to monitor how much hay is actually being eaten, either by using a large hold hay net in the stable overnight or weighing out and weighing back in the forage given in a net away from the stable. If the hay is not overly palatable and there is only a basic grade of hay, then a higher calorie and higher protein chaff is needed to improve the nutrient intake while making sure there's still enough forage consumed. To summarise, forage is more than just fibre. It's essential for maintaining digestive health and well-being. Every horse is unique, so understanding your horse's needs and adjusting their forage accordingly is key. If you have any questions that you'd like to put forward to a nutritionist to be answered, please use the form below this video and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. As a thank you for your time, we'd also like to extend an exclusive offer on our portion pacer hay nets. Details on the screen. We'll drop you an email as well in case you forget them. Thank you so much for your time today, and we hope you found it useful. Hopefully see you in the next one.